Hello, everybody. This is the Catholic Esquire checking back in with you today. Today's topic on this video is going to be the 15th station. What am I talking about? Well, as we all know, this is Holy Week, and a common devotion of Catholics, both traditional Catholics and Novus Ordo Catholics, is the Stations of the Cross devotion. Now, the Stations of the Cross devotion has been always considered to be 14 different stations. Those stations reflect different points in time in Christ's passion. So we have Christ being condemned. We have Christ falling 3 different times. We have Christ meeting his mother on the way of the cross. We have Christ being nailed to the cross. Christ crucified. Christ being laid into the tomb. Christ being laid into the tomb was always the last and 14th station of the cross. But you see, my friends, we live in new times now. We live in a church that's dominated, infiltrated, poisoned by modernism, the heresy of modernism. In my last video, when I just did my sort of my mock, but it was my honest version of a sermon for Passion Sunday, I talked about how the church has and done everything it can since the Second Vatican Council to water down the teaching of the faith, especially when it comes to Christ's passion and his sacrificial act on the cross of Calvary. They like to downplay that for several reasons. Number one, it's violent, right? And so the church is in the new times. People don't like to hear mean things or negative things, right? So we like to only focus on the positive. That's one part of it. The second part of it, I think, is even more nefarious, and we can see this in the new Mass itself, the attempt to avoid the nature of Christ's sacrificial act. In other words, with this Paschal mystery doctrine, which was essentially an invented doctrine in the 20th century, the new church in the new Mass takes away focus from Christ's sacrificial act on the cross, from the notion of justice being satisfied by Christ, and replacing it with, oh, God's love, he just did this out of love for us, out of pure charity for us. Let's refocus on the resurrection of Christ instead. Well, that's what Protestants do. And that's what I think the second driving force behind all of this is because, remember, modernists are trying to appease Protestants and other non-Catholics. And they believe that by taking away this focus of Christ's sacrifice on the cross and replacing it with, don't worry about all that. Christ rose on Easter morning and we're all saved. Isn't that wonderful? Let's be happy. Let's go hunt some Easter eggs with the Easter Bunny. By replacing the hard part of Christ's passion with the more positive notion of resurrection, they're attempting to appease the world by changing not just aesthetics, but the faith. Sadly, we also see this in the devotion of Stations of the Cross. As I mentioned, there's 14 Stations of the Cross. 14. The last one is Christ being laid in the tomb. Yes, it is a cliffhanger, isn't it? It's almost like the church saying, we leave you on this sad note. We're going to leave a cliffhanger. Wait till the resurrection comes. But we're not there yet. And in fact, when Christ was laid in the tomb, it was not Easter. It was not Easter. But through Christ's passion, death, and suffering on the cross, we were redeemed for our sins. And that's really the point of Holy Week, what we should be focusing on. And that's the point of the Stations of the Cross devotion, to focus on Christ's passion, his suffering, his example to us that he shows in each of those stations. But what did the modernist church do? They added 15th station. They added it. They added the resurrection. I say they added it. They didn't really add it. It's just what modernist churches and parishes are doing. There isn't like any official document that says, oh, you should add a 15th station. I think there's some documents that say, well, you can add, or it's okay to. Well, go to any modern Catholic parish today, in a typical suburbs, there's going to be 15 stations. It's not terribly unlike what they did to the Rosary with John Paul II's Luminous Mysteries, just adding it to the Rosary. I guess Blessed Mother Mary didn't know what she was doing. She just missed that part of it. Okay, that's a whole other video. My point for today is on the Stations of the Cross. There is no 15th station. That's completely made up. As Catholics, we must focus on Christ's passion, especially during Holy Week, especially on Good Friday, when it's very common to say the Stations of the Cross. And to reflect on that suffering, as I had mentioned in my sermon video, we focus on the physical suffering, the mental suffering, the humiliations, and understand that we're at fault for that. And what Christ did on that cross, what Christ was doing was satisfying justice for what we did to him. This isn't just something Christ did for fun and all as a lead up to the resurrection, and that's the only thing that matters. If we only talk and think about the resurrection, how does that help us become more holy in our own personal lives, in our own personal situations? So that's big problem number one with the 15th station of the cross. One other problem with the Stations of the Cross I've noticed is that the actual stations that are put up in new Novus Ordo parishes, they don't have crosses. They're depictions, they're images, but there's no actual cross. This is a major, major problem. Now, those of you who know about indulgences and receiving indulgences know that if all the preliminary requirements are met, prayers for the Holy Father, confession, receiving Holy Communion, you can receive a plenary indulgence by saying the Stations of the Cross. But there's something very interesting about that. And I want to pull this out of my handbook of indulgences. This is not a this is not a traditional book. This is based on the current canon law, based on the current law of indulgences. And it says for Stations of the Cross, the norms for obtaining this plenary indulgence are the following. And number 2 says 14 crosses are required in order to erect the Stations of the Cross. As an aid to devotion, these crosses are customarily attached to 14 tableaux or images representing the Jerusalem stations. My friends, if you think you're getting plenary indulgences by doing Stations of the Cross before images that have no cross in them, or before anything that's not a cross, that's a problem. Now you have to ask yourself, how could the church be so negligent with this? How could they have so many images put up in so many parish churches and not have a cross? Now, if you don't believe me, go check out my prior video when I went into the field to explore modernism in the real world. And when I went to that Jesuit chapel, remember that? I took some video there. I wish I had it in front of me right now, but you can go back and look at that video. And when you look at that, I did take some video of the Stations of the Cross there. And notice there were no crosses. They were depictions only. I would say that there's a real question as to whether I satisfied the requirements for a plenary indulgence if I went to that Jesuit chapel and did a full-blown Stations of the Cross, all 14. I think, of course, they had 15 there, right? Assuming I just did 14, I would have some real doubt in my mind about that because there were no crosses there. And this book says you need crosses for Stations of the Cross, which makes sense. If you go to traditional Catholic parishes, you will notice above each of the stations, the images depicting the station, there's a cross there. Almost always in traditional parishes, especially those built before Second Vatican Council. So I just needed to point these realities out. I'm sorry to have to be the bad guy here to do it. I know it upsets a lot of people. I recently did Stations of the Cross myself at an outside shrine. On my thumbnail, I took a picture of the 15th station versus the 14th station, and you can see the difference. I mean, I have no idea why they're doing this to us. I have no idea why the church is doing its best to uh, avoid the idea that Christ suffered. He actually suffocated to death, bled out in satisfaction for our sins. But that is the truth. That's the purpose of the devotion. It's been hijacked by modernism. I wanted to call your attention to these things. So keep this in mind next time you do the Stations of the Cross. Keep your eye out for those crosses on the station, because you need crosses for the Stations of the Cross. And also keep that in the back of your mind that there is no 15th station. There's no point in having a 15th station. In fact, it detracts and takes away from the devotion, in my humble opinion. Thank you for listening. Please share the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel. As always, I hope this helps. And I do hope and pray that you're all having a blessed Holy Week. Take care.